Welcome. I'm Christine Duvivier, and I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon. I know this is a crazy time for a lot of people, and so we are going to talk about what you want to talk about. The topic that we're here to talk about is communication, and in particular, communication that increases calm, clarity, and confidence in your leadership. So I work a lot with leaders, and I, over the past couple of weeks, have been hearing questions from clients that I coach, as well as there's clients in a Leading Positive Change masterclass that I'm running. It's actually an online program. We're fortunate for that. And some questions that have been coming up for them, I think, relate to what we're talking about today. So because we're in the midst of this change, I thought I would start by just sharing with you some of the questions that are coming up that I'm hearing and see how these relate for you. So one of the things that I hear from people is questions on how can I communicate to help people be more positive in the midst of all this bad news, to build hope and team cohesion when we're not physically in the same room? Or how can I communicate to deal with people who shut down and don't want to be more positive? In fact, these may be people who are kind of naysayers at the best of times. Have the right messaging when I'm feeling stressed and isolated, and so not feeling on my game. Or handling this level of ambiguity, like just so much more uncertainty and confusion for a lot of us. And the pace of change is still, well, it's exaggerated now, but even if it was intense before in some organizations or with some companies that you're running, now all the change that's happening, that's creating a lot of uncertainty. Or how can I pull people together, right? Maybe outside of my team or outside of my organization and help to reduce some of the barriers that are coming up. All right, I'll go back to the chat. You can just put your questions in the chat. If the poll's not working for you, just put your questions in the chat and we'll take it from there. Okay. All right, so keeping the team engaged. Yeah. Communicate with clients that I'd ordinarily talk with in person. Yeah. Supporting your team through furlough while you're also on furlough. Okay. Reassuring employees when we are entering the work office again. Okay. Okay, messages of hope without being naive. Yeah. Without coming across as naive. Okay, so I'm going to start with these, but feel free to put more in here and then I will check on them later and try to make sure that we're answering your questions throughout. So one of the things, I'm going to end the poll that nobody could see. All right. So one of the things that people have said to me is that some of these tools, like there are things that you've learned over time, or if you've learned anything in positive psychology before, there are tools that and yet, what leaders are telling me sometimes is that in real time, it's not always easy to figure out. Okay, thanks. So let me go back to sharing the slides, just a second. Here we go. So we'll try to focus on that. And Okay, I've got some things prepared for you, but we'll also just go with wherever you want to go with this. So first of all, let me just start by saying, what I call FUD facts. So FUD being fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And when people are faced with new levels of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD, people often do one of two things. They often blame themselves or they blame others. And that's because they've been told by the world around them that if they don't perform well, or if something is going wrong in their world, that means there's something wrong with you. That's what they're being told. That you may have been told that. And the fact is that it's actually healthier for their well-being, for your well-being, to blame someone else than to blame yourself, believe it or not. Now, I'm not saying that we want to go around blaming other people, but if you have any sense of people blaming others or blaming you in any way, sometimes, with some leaders, sometimes they're feeling as if either people on their team or people from other organizations are sort of coming at them in certain ways. And certainly we see in the world around us, if you see the news at all, a lot of blame being thrown around. Well, that is actually healthier than blaming ourselves, because when you blame yourself, you get a sense of powerlessness and hopelessness, and that's a lower level emotion. All right, when you're blaming someone else, at least you're kind of getting angry, and that moves energy. And by the way, just to tell you where I get some of these things from, that's actually known in traditional psychology, that anger actually moves people forward from a place of, say, depression or something like that, feeling powerless. Also, there's spiritual practices, including Esther Hicks is one person I learned from, where just understanding that anger is an emotion that is a step forward from being, say, overwhelmed or powerless or helpless or depressed. So again, we don't want to go around blaming other people, but just to understand, put it in context, that's sometimes what's happening. But people are being told, if they're not performing, if something's going wrong in their world, there's something wrong with you. And I first learned about all this when there was a tragedy with a young man that I know, and that's a story for another time, and there's more about it on my website. But I was in the positive psychology program getting my master's, and as a result of the tragedy, I shifted my attention for that time, for my research, away from leaders, and I looked at young adults. And as a result of my research on kids who are not in the top of their classes, I came to discover that there are hidden gifts and strengths that are just in conflict with school. But also I've come to learn through my work with leaders, as I've come back from that research and over the last 14 years, that there are a lot of people carrying these feelings, even if it's not from school. I mean, it may have started in school days, but there's this sense that there's something wrong with you if you're not performing where you should be, or you're not adjusting the way you should be, or if there's something wrong in your world. And what I've come to believe, I've come to know, is that there's nothing wrong with you, no matter how you're performing now. And I believe there's nothing wrong with your employees either, although I know that might be a stretch for some of them right now. I'm not saying there can't be a very bad fit. I'm not saying that there can't be bad moments with them. But what I do believe is that what's wrong is that we're told to focus on the wrong questions. We are shown by the world around us very, very often that the questions to ask are what's wrong in the world, or what's wrong with you, or what's wrong with this kid, or what's wrong with this employee or this person. And I believe that those are the wrong questions. My question is, what's right with you? And we're going to come back to that as we talk today. It relates to some of the questions you have around supporting employees, engaging your team, reassuring people, and giving messages of hope. And I'll talk more about that as we go through this. For now, let's just start by focusing on 3 mistakes that most leaders are making now. And this is what I'm picking up from my work in the world, listening to people and what's going on out there, and just seeing what happens with a lot of people, right? Because there's messages that leaders are given that I believe are actually, I would say wrong, but maybe I should say not effective. So first of all, the first mistake I want to talk about is just the idea that most leaders believe that they must get others to feel better and behave better. We're told that a leader's responsibility is to make their people happier, to make their people more engaged, to have their people feel more connected to whatever it is, to have their people be more satisfied. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment. The second mistake that most leaders are making is most leaders believe that they should look at bad news and then find a way to feel good. So I get questions like, well, how do I keep a positive mindset or keep my people in a growth mindset when there's so much bad news? The third mistake I think most leaders are making now is that most leaders are asking the wrong questions. And I showed you a little bit of that before, but we'll come back and look at that. Now, in terms of communicating with a client from a distance versus in person, I think some of what we're talking about here will be relevant to that, but I would also appreciate you just clarifying in the chat what you'd like to get at that we might not be getting at. So another fun fact, when faced with new levels of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, most people focus on changing other people's behavior. Okay, what I mean by that is, again, things like trying to make them happier, trying to make them change the way they're doing things, trying to make them be more responsive to what we need, perhaps, whatever it is, but trying to get other people to change their behavior. And again, coming back to this idea that most leaders believe that they're responsible for reducing employees' stress, and that to make things better, they've got to change feelings or behavior, that's their responsibility. Well, exceptional leaders know that it's not about them meaning the other people. Exceptional leaders know that communication starts with me and how I am. And I have no control over someone else's happiness, someone else's behavior, someone else's feelings. So when I make it about them, about the other people, what happens is I make myself powerless in certain ways. Okay, because I'm powerless to change how they feel. You could be the best possible leader, and someone else might still be unhappy. You could be the best possible leader, and someone else might still behave badly. So that's a real shift that most people don't really get. And what happens in a time like this is that many, many people become scared and anxious because there is so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt around. And in a situation like what we have going on right now, people can start to feel powerless. Well, if you start focusing on trying to change how someone else is responding to you, how someone else is feeling, how someone else is behaving, that's going to leave you feeling a bit more powerless. So what can you do instead? As we think about that, let me just ask you this. Have you ever had someone try a little too hard to make you feel better? And I'm going to just go to the chat for a minute. Okay, so you haven't had someone. Okay, that's great. I love that you haven't had someone. All right. Okay, so if you're talking about the workplace, yes. If you are a great leader, our place should be stress-free. Okay, so yeah. Okay, and then Lee, I see you said yes, and you can always tell that they're trying too hard. Yeah, and somebody else said in my personal life, and it was all wrong. Yeah, so sometimes when people tell us, and they try to cheer us up, or they try to make us feel better, or they try to tell us things are going to be good, and we're not feeling it, or even it's not so much that we're not feeling it, we probably aren't feeling it, but the issue becomes that they're not really feeling it. Because when somebody's feeling good about something, let me ask you this. Have you ever just had a sense that someone felt okay, or actually felt pretty upbeat in a situation that didn't seem good to you? Have you ever had a leader where maybe there was something going on in the organization or the company, and maybe it didn't feel that good to a lot of people, but you just sort of had this sense of confidence from this leader? It goes back to that saying that, your action speaks so loud, I can't hear what you're saying. But it's also your energy speaks so loud, right? Think about it if you've ever been in a room with someone who's in a frenzy or all agitated about something, or if you've been in a room where someone was calm and clear and confident, right? You pick up, you can sense that energy. And that's what happens with our people. So I'm going to go back to the share for a minute now. Okay. Yeah, so we want to stay away from that, from this idea that we have to jump in and save people. So I was a lifeguard when I was a teenager. Some of you may have been too. And the first rule of lifeguarding is you're of no use if you get pulled under. And when people are drowning, they're going to grab on anything they can. And they don't mean to drown you, but they will. So lifeguards are taught you cannot get pulled under by the other person. And I think what we're talking about here is very similar. If you are pulled under by your people, you're of no use. And this is one of the conversations I'm having with a lot of leaders these days. Right? It's about how do you keep yourself in a stronger, calmer, clearer place, so that if, for example, a client or an employee or somebody from another group is agitated or is grasping or is in a bad place, that you stay in this steadier place, because that's the only way you can really help others, is to stay in a better place yourself. And what I'm seeing happen is a lot of people, a lot of leaders, very, very well-meaning people who really care about others, are getting sucked in a little bit by the energy of people, not in the same room with them right now, but the energy of the people around them. So let's talk about some things that you can do to avoid that. And just keep in mind that I believe there is no one size fits all. I really think it depends so much on where are you starting from, right? What are you feeling right now? What are you, but particularly what are you feeling right now, okay? Because when people are in a better feeling place, some strategies work better. When they're in a lesser feeling place, other strategies work better. There is not a one size fits all. So with that in mind, let's talk about some strategies and how you might adapt them for yourself. All right, so going back to this question of, well, okay, there's so much bad news around, how do I stay more positive? Or how do I help my people have more of a positive attitude or a growth mindset when there's so much bad news around? Well, again, you really can't do it for someone else, but what you can do is do it for yourself. And what will happen is you're actually contagious. right? Your energy is contagious. So if you can stay in that stronger, good feeling place, that will affect others. So how do you do that? All right, well, one way you can do that is to put your attention elsewhere. And this I'm bringing in from a number of different places I've learned this, but for sure, Marty Seligman in Positive Psychology, we talk about that. Some of my spiritual practices, Esther Hicks for sure, Daryl Anka, and even I think religious organizations or religious institutions, right? The idea that this too shall pass. So, or turn the other way, or whatever that saying is. So turn the other cheek. Put your attention elsewhere. So we are told that we are supposed to be watching the news all the time, and we are supposed to be immersing ourselves in this bad news. That's just not true. There's a lot of good news out there, despite what's going on with this virus. And when it's fine to understand what's going on, of course. But if you allow yourself to really be immersed in that energy for a lot of time, over a long period of time, or in conversations with other people, what happens is, it's just going to happen by osmosis. You're going to start picking up on that energy, and that's going to affect you. So putting your attention elsewhere. Okay, anything that feels good to you. So that exercise, dogs, cats, other pets, cute animal videos online. That's supposed to say babies. I don't know what happened to the bee there. Ocean and sun, for example. These are some of the things people tell me. Obviously, when your dog, cat, or baby isn't behaving very well, that's probably not the time that is going to be what we're talking about here. But anything you can give your attention to, and you could either be with them in a room or separate from them and just thinking about it, but that'll help. From Eckhart Tolle and a lot of other teachers is the idea of focus on right now. So right now, in this very moment, as you take this very breath, if you focus on right now, you will notice that you're okay right now. A third thing that I recommend, and I know I have clients who say meditation does not work for them, that's fine. But if you can use a guided meditation, if you can do any sort of meditation, that is a way of quieting your mind and getting it off of what's going on in the day-to-day. And I know myself, sometimes that's hard to do when there's a lot going on. If you have any trouble meditating, or if you've only got 30 seconds, one thing you can do, and I learned this from someone named Corey on LinkedIn, and I want to give him credit, but I haven't been able to go back and find his name. But listen to this chime until you can't hear it any further. People tell me that that calms them, especially if they do it a few times. Okay, a second thing you can do for yourself is adapt your thoughts. So what I mean by this is coming out of Marty Seligman's work on optimism and also on learned helplessness. I think one of the most important concepts you can think about is the idea of temporary. So tell yourself, this is temporary. This is not going to go on forever. It is temporary. And again, there's religious and spiritual traditions that also get at that, but that's, I think, one of the most powerful words you can use. This is temporary. A second thing you could do is accept your current emotion. So most of the time, what happens is, without even thinking about it, we kind of fight the emotion that we're feeling. We don't like feeling whatever it is, unless we're feeling excited and happy. But if we're feeling what we view as a negative emotion, often we start trying to do things or focus on other people or focus on what's going on in the news because we're sort of moving away from that emotion. If you can just name your emotion, so do that right now. Like think of a negative emotion you've had in the last 24 hours, one that you just didn't feel great. Okay. Name that emotion. Was it fear? Was it discomfort? Was it uneasiness? Was it anger, unhappiness, depression, overwhelm? And just accept that you're human and it's okay to have that emotion. And then you can ask yourself, what can I say to feel a little less? So let's assume you said, I felt scared. Then you can ask yourself the question, and I suggest writing this, what can I say to feel a little less scared? And by the way, this strategy comes out of Karen Rivich's work in resilience. It comes out of Esther Hicks' work. There's a number of different places. It comes out of cognitive behavioral therapy. But what can I say to myself to feel a little less of whatever it is? And finally, again, from resilience and cognitive behavioral therapy, is this idea that you already have thought about the worst things that can happen. Ask yourself, what's the best possible thing that could happen out of this? And then I finally mentioned that you can ask yourself better questions. Right. So what's in the world around us? I was on a webinar earlier today. It's the same thing, asking, talking a lot about what's wrong and what's going wrong with things. But for you, you could choose to ask yourself, what's good about me? And spend some time writing about that. What's good in my employees? And when I say spend some time, I'm talking about 1 minute to 2 minutes. Okay, it does not need to be a lot of time. What's good in my world? Or here's a question I really love. Am I willing to believe that something good could come from this? And that's a question that I've adapted from Daryl Anka. So I want to leave you with this thought. When you are calm, steady, and clear, what are you communicating? Whether you're in the room with someone or at a distance. What are you communicating to them? What's the energy they're picking up on from you? What is that saying? And then you can go into questions like, what do you want to say when you're feeling this way? How do you want to say it? A lot of times I find that leaders get stuck because they're not in a calm, clear place. Their energy's agitated. They're picking up on agitation in other people. And then they're trying to figure out what to say. And they're trying to soothe other people. If you start this way, if you reverse it, it's much easier. So I'm going to pause there. And I'll just say, let's stay connected if you'd like to. I am doing a free guided meditation. I was asked to start doing some guided meditation, so a weekly guided meditation if anybody's interested in that. And there's ways to reach out if you want to, or to check out anything that I've talked about here. Let me just stop the share here and go back to the chat. I know at least one of you was interested in thinking about client communication. Did this help with what you need on client communication, or is there something more you were thinking about there? And how about the other questions in terms of team engagement, supporting people when they're in furlough? I think, in terms of things like a furlough or when people are re-entering in some kind of reassurance, I think we've really talked about that. It's very much about you finding a way to feel better right now. And when you do that, the communication with others is easy. It's really not so much about reassuring them. It's much more about allowing them to feel your calm, steady energy. And my clients that are working with this have told me that it really has helped. Wonderful. So I'm just going to put up once more how we can stay in touch if you choose to. And if not, it's been my true pleasure preparing these thoughts for you and sharing them and hearing what's on your minds and your feedback. So thank you for being here.